Maya stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of her apartment, gazing out at the city below. The lights sparkled like tiny stars scattered across a vast, dark ocean. It had been almost a year since she walked away from her old life. A year since she made the hardest decision of her life. She had left everything behind: her home, her career, and, most painfully, Arif. At first, it had seemed like an impossible choice. Their love had been the kind that people only dreamed about. Every moment had been filled with laughter, tenderness, and an undeniable connection that made everything else feel insignificant. But somewhere along the way, Arif had changed. The man who once made her feel like the center of his universe slowly became distant, consumed by his ambitions and his own secrets. Maya had tried to hold on, to believe that love could fix everything. But there came a day when she realized she was no longer the person she once was. The love they had shared no longer filled her with warmth. It left her feeling cold and empty. She had tried to confront him, to ask for the truth, but his answers always seemed to dance around her questions. And so, she walked away. She chose herself, or at least, that's what she told herself. Now, as she stood there, her phone buzzed softly on the kitchen counter. She hesitated for a moment, feeling a tightness in her chest. She didn't need to check. She already knew who it was. It had been happening more and more lately. Letters, messages, even flowers. Small attempts that Arif had made to reach her, hoping for a second chance, hoping to undo the damage that had been done. She turned away from the window, pacing across the living room as the silence in the apartment pressed against her. She could still hear his voice in her mind, the way it had sounded when he begged her to stay, the desperation in his words. But she had made a decision, and that decision was final, or so she had convinced herself. There were moments, though, when her resolve wavered. She would be walking down the street, passing a cafe, and suddenly, the scent of his favorite coffee would remind her of the mornings they spent together, talking about their future. She'd see a couple laughing in the park, their fingers intertwined, and for a second, it felt like she had never left him. But then, she would shake the thought away. She had built a life without him now. It hadn't been easy, but Maya had thrown herself into her work, into her new friends, into every new possibility she could find. She had redefined herself, reinvented the woman she wanted to be. It was painful at first, every step feeling like a weight on her chest, but gradually, she started to find joy in the small things. A quiet evening with a book, an afternoon spent exploring the city, even the simple pleasure of eating dinner alone without feeling lonely. But no matter how hard she tried to move on, the past had a way of creeping back in. Every now and then, she would find herself caught in a moment, a memory, a song, a place that would pull her back to him. And when that happened, a familiar guilt would settle over her. Had she made the right choice? Was walking away truly the only way to save herself, or had she destroyed something beautiful out of fear? The phone buzzed again. She glanced at it this time, her heart skipping a beat as she saw his name on the screen. Arif. She hadn't heard from him in weeks, not since the last time he had tried to reach her, leaving a voicemail that she never listened to. She quickly silenced the phone, throwing it back onto the couch. But the message had already been received, even without her listening to it. It wasn't that she didn't care. She did. Maya cared more than she let on. The truth was, part of her wanted to hear from him, to know what he was doing, to see if he had changed. But the other part of her, the part that had fought so hard to get to this point, knew that reopening that door could only lead to more heartache. The night dragged on, and Maya found herself drifting in and out of thoughts about him, about the life she used to have. She couldn't help it. It had been hard to forget the way Arif had looked at her when they first met, the warmth in his eyes, the way his smile made her feel like the luckiest person alive. But she couldn't go back to that. She wouldn't. A knock at the door snapped her out of her thoughts. She wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, she walked over and peered through the peephole. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw who it was standing there, the last person she ever thought she would see again. Without thinking, she swung the door open. There he was, standing in front of her, looking just as she remembered him. Handsome, yet weary. Arif's eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, neither of them spoke. It was as though the years had collapsed into that one shared look, and everything that had been left unsaid between them suddenly flooded the air. "Can we talk?" Arif asked, his voice softer than she remembered. His words felt like a question and a plea, all at once. Maya swallowed, her heart racing. She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to slam the door shut and run back into the safety of her new life. But another part, an old part, wanted to hear him out, to see if there was still something left to salvage. She took a deep breath, stepped aside, and motioned for him to come in. Arif stepped inside, his gaze flickering around the apartment, as if taking in every detail, as if trying to piece together the life Maya had built without him. The silence between them was thick, laden with the weight of everything that had passed and everything that still felt unresolved. Maya stood by the door, unsure of what to do next, her mind racing with 1,000 questions, none of which she had the courage to ask aloud. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Arif ran a hand through his hair, clearly nervous. He had always been confident, the type to take charge, but now there was something vulnerable about him. Maya couldn't help but notice the way his shoulders slumped, as if the time they had spent apart had aged him in a way she hadn't expected. "How have you been?" Maya finally asked, her voice quieter than she intended. She was surprised at how calm it sounded, given the storm of emotions she was feeling inside. Arif shifted his weight, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her chest tighten. "I've been surviving," he said, the words heavy with a mix of regret and sorrow. "I've been trying to fix things, Maya. I've been trying to fix me." Maya swallowed, the words hanging in the air between them. She wasn't sure what to say. She wanted to ask him what had happened, why he hadn't tried harder to be present when they were together, but she held back. She had asked those questions 1,000 times in her head, and yet the answers never seemed to make sense. "What do you want from me, Arif?" she asked instead, her voice barely above a whisper. Her own words surprised her. She had imagined this moment 100 times, had played out every scenario in her mind, but hearing his voice again, seeing him in front of her, changed everything. He seemed to hesitate before answering, his hands fidgeting nervously at his sides. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said slowly, the words almost too painful for him to get out. "I don't even expect you to understand. But I need to say this. I've been a fool, Maya. I was selfish. I took you for granted. And now I don't know how to fix it. But I want to try. I want to make things right, even if it's too late." Maya's breath caught in her throat. She had heard apologies before, but this one felt different. It wasn't the rehearsed apology of someone who wanted to clear their conscience. It was raw, honest, almost desperate. She could see the weight of regret in his eyes, the way his lips trembled as he spoke. She looked at him, her heart warring with itself. She had tried so hard to move on, to build a new life without him. But standing here, listening to his voice, feeling the sincerity in his words, it stirred something deep inside her, something she had thought was buried. "I've spent so much time trying to forget you," she said, her voice trembling as she spoke the truth she had been hiding even from herself. "I built a life without you because I thought that was the only way I could survive. But now I don't know what to think." Arif took a cautious step toward her, his eyes searching hers for any sign of what she was feeling. "Maya, I'm not asking for us to pick up where we left off," he said softly. I know I don't deserve that, but I just need you to know that I've changed. I know it's not enough, and I can't undo the past, but if you can give me the chance, I'll show you that I'm not the man I was." His words were almost too much for her to take in. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But there was a part of her, a scared, protective part, that told her to stay away, to walk out that door and never look back. Maya turned away, pacing across the room, trying to steady her breathing. She couldn't look at him, not yet. "You've had a year, Arif," she said, her voice shaking as she spoke, the walls she had carefully built around herself starting to crumble. "A year to change, a year to figure it out. And all I've had is a year of wondering if I made the right decision, if I was strong enough to let you go. And now you show up and expect me to believe that everything can just go back to the way it was?" Arif didn't respond immediately. He seemed to absorb her words, his face falling with each syllable. "I know it's not that simple," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I never thought it would be. But Maya, I can't keep living in this regret. I can't keep pretending that I didn't lose the best part of my life." Maya felt a sharp sting in her chest, the pain of what they had lost surfacing in waves. She turned to face him, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I don't know if I can trust you again, Arif," she whispered. "I don't know if I can ever believe in us again." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. The room seemed to close in around her as she realized the enormity of the decision she was facing. She had already chosen to walk away once. Could she do it again? Could she face the possibility of him being part of her life again, knowing that it might bring her nothing but more heartbreak? Arif didn't say anything for a long time, but the look in his eyes said everything. He wasn't asking for forgiveness, not yet. But he was asking for a chance. And that was something she hadn't been prepared for. As Maya looked at him, she felt something shift inside her. The walls she had spent so long building began to crack, and she realized that despite everything, a part of her still wanted him. That part, the part of her that had loved him so deeply, so completely, was still there, lurking beneath the surface. And it terrified her. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know if I can open up to you again. I don't know if I can forgive you." Arif nodded, his expression filled with a quiet understanding. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," he said softly. "But I'm not going anywhere, Maya. I'll wait as long as it takes." The words hung between them, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Maya felt the weight of what they were both asking, of what they were both willing to risk. She didn't know what the future held, or if they would ever truly find their way back to each other. But in that moment, something inside her told her that perhaps, just perhaps, they weren't done yet. The next few days passed in a blur for Maya. She couldn't seem to think clearly, her mind constantly drifting back to Arif. Every time she thought she had put the past behind her, something would remind her of him. An old song on the radio, a shared memory that flickered through her mind when she least expected it. Arif's words echoed in her head. "I'll wait as long as it takes." She hadn't expected him to say that. Part of her had hoped he would just walk away, to let her live her life in peace without the weight of the past hanging over her. But he hadn't. She found herself staring at her phone more often than she cared to admit. Arif hadn't tried to reach her again, not directly at least. But there had been subtle signs. An article on her social media feed with a comment from him, or a message from a mutual friend telling her that he was still asking about her. The thought of him constantly lingering in the background of her life made her feel both guilty and angry. She had left for a reason. She had made her choice, hadn't she? But Maya couldn't shake the feeling that there was something unfinished between them. When she closed her eyes, she could still see his face. The way his eyes had softened when he looked at her. The sincerity in his voice when he'd apologized. I'm not asking for us to pick up where we left off, he'd said. And yet, there she was, standing on the precipice of something that felt both familiar and foreign. Maya spent the next few days distracting herself with work. She immersed herself in meetings, projects, anything that would keep her mind off of Arif. It was easier this way. At least when she was focused, she didn't have to confront the emotions that swirled inside her. But even then, her mind kept wandering back to him, to the way he had looked when he stood in her living room, asking for another chance. She couldn't help but wonder, was he really sincere? Had he changed? Or was he just a man grasping at the last shred of something he had lost? One evening, as she sat in a quiet cafe, sipping her coffee, her phone buzzed again. She glanced down, expecting the usual updates from friends or colleagues. But this time, it was different. It was from Arif. The message was short, just a few lines, but it hit her hard. Maya, I saw you posted a picture at the park today. It reminded me of the day we went there. Do you remember? I can't stop thinking about you. Maya stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. The words pulled her back to a time when things were simpler, when she hadn't yet known the pain of walking away. She remembered the day he was talking about. A sunny afternoon at the park, when they had sat under a tree, laughing and talking about their future, as if nothing in the world could tear them apart. For a brief moment, Maya was caught between two worlds. On one hand, she could feel the tenderness of their past, the love they had shared, the moments that had made her believe in the magic of their relationship. But on the other hand, there was the memory of the pain, the betrayal, the quiet realization that love alone wasn't enough to keep them together. She put the phone down with a sigh, the weight of her emotions pulling her in two different directions. She wasn't sure what Arif wanted from her. Was he truly asking for another chance, or was he simply reaching out because he couldn't let go of the idea of what they once had? Maya spent the next few hours in a daze, lost in thought. The evening sky darkened, and soon, she was walking home through the quiet streets of the city. As she walked, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a voicemail. She didn't need to check the number. She already knew it was from Arif. With a deep breath, she pressed play. Maya, Arif's voice came through, shaky and hesitant. I know you've probably heard everything I've said before, and I know it's hard to believe me. But I just need you to know. What I said before, about waiting for you, it's not some kind of promise I made lightly. It's just the truth. I'm not expecting anything from you, but I can't move on without telling you that I'm sorry. I was wrong, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to show you that I've changed. If you don't feel the same, I'll understand. But if there's even a small chance, I just want you to know that I'm here, and I'll be here, always. Maya stopped walking. She could feel her heart racing in her chest, her breath coming in short gasps. His voice was soft, filled with raw emotion. She could hear the sincerity, the vulnerability in every word. And yet, there was a part of her that wanted to push it all away. She had moved on. She had built a life for herself, without him. She didn't need him anymore. But why then did it still hurt so much? She stood there, the city lights flickering around her, as the weight of his words settled over her. He had apologized. He had said he was willing to wait, to prove that he was a different man. But Maya wasn't sure if she was ready to take that step again. Was she really ready to risk her heart, her new life, on the possibility that things could work between them? For the first time in months, Maya felt truly torn. She had thought walking away would give her the peace she had longed for, but instead, it had only left her with more questions. What if this was the second chance they both needed? What if Arif had truly changed? Or maybe she was just afraid. Afraid of what it would mean to let him back into her life, to open her heart again, to allow herself to believe in love once more. Maya stood still for a long time, wrestling with the emotions inside her. And then, As if on instinct, she made her decision. She wasn't ready to let go of everything yet, not completely. Taking a deep breath, she dialed his number. Arif picked up on the first ring. His voice, though steady, carried an edge of nervousness. Maya. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stood there, her finger pressed against the phone, unsure of what to say next. For a long moment, there was only silence between them. A silence that felt thick with unspoken words, with the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future. Finally, Maya exhaled, breaking the quiet. Arif, she began, her voice calm but wavering ever so slightly. I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know if I can open up to you again. She felt the words hanging between them like a fragile bridge, ready to collapse at any moment. I understand, he said immediately, his voice soft but resolute. I don't expect you to have all the answers now, Maya. I don't expect you to be ready today. I just need you to know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Maya felt a lump form in her throat, the deep ache of everything that had happened between them resurfacing. She had built a life without him, a life that, in some ways, felt more real and secure than the one they had shared. But at the same time, there was a gaping hole where he used to be, a part of her that longed for the warmth of his presence. It was hard to admit, harder still to face the possibility that maybe, just maybe, walking away hadn't solved everything. I'm scared, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm scared that if I let you back in, I'll end up losing myself again. I don't know how to trust you, not after everything. Then let me show you, Arif replied, his voice filled with quiet urgency. I don't want to rush you, Maya. I'm not asking you to forget what happened. I'm asking you to trust me enough to give us a chance to figure it out, even if it takes time. I'll prove it to you, step by step. No pressure, no expectations, just time. Maya leaned against the cold brick wall outside her apartment, staring up at the night sky. His words were gentle, but they felt like a plea, a prayer for something she wasn't sure she could give. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, trying to calm the storm inside her. She had spent so long convincing herself that she was better off without him, that walking away had been the right choice. But now, standing on the edge of this conversation, Maya couldn't help but wonder if she had been running from her own fears rather than the truth. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted, her voice shaking slightly. I don't know if I can go back. Not now. Not after everything. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Arif spoke again, his voice was low, almost a whisper. I'm not asking you to go back, Maya. I'm asking you to move forward, with me or without me. It's your choice. I just want the chance to show you that I'm not the same person I was before. I've changed. I've learned. And if you're willing to let me, I'll spend every day showing you that I deserve a place in your life again. Maya's heart skipped a beat. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that people could change, that love could overcome the mistakes of the past. But her mind kept racing, questioning everything, doubting every word he said. Could she trust him? Could she trust herself to make the right choice? Arif. She trailed off, not sure where to go next. I need time. I need time to think. I understand, he said quickly, as though he had anticipated her response. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere, Maya. Whenever you're ready, I'll be here. Maya pressed the phone to her ear, staring blankly at the ground, lost in the whirlwind of her emotions. His words had left an imprint on her heart, but there was still so much uncertainty. She had walked away for a reason. Had that reason been right? Or had she been too quick to give up? Okay, she said, her voice soft but firm. I'll think about it. I'll figure it out. I'll wait, he repeated. His voice was steady now, no trace of doubt or impatience in it. Take your time, Maya. I'll be right here when you're ready. As she ended the call, Maya stood there for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. She hadn't made a decision yet, but she knew one thing for sure. Arif wasn't going to give up. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to make her question everything she had believed about love, about herself, and about the life she had tried so hard to build without him. The next few days passed in a haze. Maya couldn't focus on anything for long, her thoughts always drifting back to Arif. She knew he was waiting, and a small part of her felt guilty for not having the answers he needed. She didn't want to lead him on, but at the same time, she couldn't shake the feeling that he was the one person who truly understood her, who had once made her feel like she mattered in a way no one else ever had. One evening, she found herself walking through the city, her feet taking her to a place she hadn't visited in months, the park. It was where they had spent so many afternoons together, the place where they had made their plans, their promises, their dreams. As she walked through the familiar paths, the memories came rushing back, each one as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. She stopped at the bench where they had once sat, their hands intertwined as they talked about the future. Maya closed her eyes, the wind brushing against her face, carrying with it the scent of the past. She sat down, her heart heavy with uncertainty. And then, in the distance, she saw a figure walking toward her, a man with a familiar stride. A rush of emotions flooded through her as she recognized him. Arif. Her breath caught in her throat. Maya's heart skipped a beat as Arif's figure grew closer. He walked with purpose, his steps slow but steady, as though he was carefully weighing each movement. As he reached the bench, his eyes locked with hers, and for a brief moment, the world around them seemed to fade into the background. The hustle of the city, the hum of the streetlights, even the chill of the evening air, all of it disappeared, leaving just the two of them, suspended in time. "Maya," Arif said, his voice quiet but filled with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. He stood a few feet away, as if giving her space, respecting the invisible boundaries that had formed between them over the past year. She felt her pulse quicken. The last time they had seen each other, it had been filled with unresolved tension, with an emotional weight that neither of them had known how to carry. But now, here he was, standing in front of her once again, and everything that she had carefully locked away seemed to surge to the surface. "Maya, I didn't want to do this over the phone," he continued, his voice tinged with a quiet vulnerability that caught her off guard. "I know you need time, and I respect that. But I can't keep waiting in the shadows, wondering if you'll ever give me a chance to prove that I've changed." She didn't know what to say. She had rehearsed 1,000 conversations in her mind, answers to all his apologies, counter-arguments to his promises, but now that he was here, standing in front of her, nothing seemed to make sense. All the anger, all the hurt she'd buried deep inside, melted away in the face of his sincerity. And yet, the fear remained. The fear that letting him back in would only lead to more pain. "I don't know if I can trust you, Arif," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can let myself be vulnerable again." Arif took a cautious step forward, his eyes softening as he met her gaze. "I'm not asking you to trust me all at once," he said, his voice earnest. "I'm asking for a chance, for us to start from the beginning, if that's what you need. No expectations, no promises, just us, just time." Maya's breath caught in her throat. The last time they had been here, at this very bench, it had felt like the start of something beautiful. But now, there was too much between them. Too much history, too much pain, too much unfinished business. She had built walls around herself, strong and tall, thinking they would protect her from more heartache. But standing here now, facing the man she had once loved, she realized those walls were beginning to crumble. "What do you want from me, Arif?" Her voice cracked slightly, betraying the mix of fear and longing that she had buried so deep inside. "What is it that you think can fix this?" He paused for a moment, his gaze never leaving hers. Then, with a quiet intensity, he said, "I want us to have a second chance, Maya. Not because I deserve it, but because I believe we still have something worth fighting for. I'm not asking you to erase the past. I'm asking you to look forward, to see if there's still a chance for us, despite everything." Maya closed her eyes, the weight of his words pressing down on her. It was what she had wanted to hear all along, the desire for a future together, a promise of change. But could she really believe him? Could she take the leap and trust that this time would be different? "Arif," she whispered, her heart racing. "I've spent so much time trying to forget you, trying to move on, and yet I'm still here, standing here, talking to you. And I don't know what that means." His face softened, the lines of worry deepening around his eyes. "It means you're still thinking about it, and that's enough. That's all I need right now." Maya swallowed hard, feeling a lump in her throat. She had told herself she was done with him. She had convinced herself that walking away was the right decision. But deep down, there was a part of her that still longed for the connection they had shared, the love that had once felt so effortless, so pure. She looked up at him, and for the first time, really looked at him. His face was older, his eyes tired, but there was a sincerity in them that she hadn't seen before. He wasn't the same man who had walked away from her without a second thought. He wasn't the same man who had let her slip away without a fight. The Arif standing before her now was different, vulnerable in a way that unsettled her, yet somehow comforted her as well. "I don't know if I'm ready to open that door again," Maya said quietly, her hands gripping the edge of the bench, as though holding on to something solid in a world that suddenly felt uncertain. "I don't know if I can risk my heart again." Arif nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "I'm not asking you to risk anything. I'm asking you to take it one step at a time. If you can't trust me right away, that's okay. I'll prove myself to you. I'll prove that I'm here for the long haul." The words hung in the air between them. She looked away, staring into the distance, trying to sort through the whirlwind of thoughts and emotions that flooded her mind. She had spent so long convincing herself that she didn't need him, that she didn't need anyone. She had built a new life, a life that was independent and safe from the chaos of love. But now, as she sat here with him, she realized that safety had come at a price. Her heart ached with the possibility of what could be, of what she might lose and gain if she took a chance on him again. "I don't know, Arif," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know what's next, but I'm not ready to say goodbye, not yet." Arif's expression softened, a quiet relief washing over him. He took another step closer, his voice gentle. "Then let's take this one day at a time. Let's figure it out together." Maya looked up at him, her heart beating wildly in her chest. Maybe it wasn't about finding all the answers right now. Maybe it was about taking the first step, together, and seeing where it led. With a small, tentative smile, she nodded. One day at a time. Arif smiled back, his eyes lighting up with something Maya hadn't seen in a long time: hope. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Maya allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a future for them after all. The days that followed were a blur of uncertainty and cautious hope. Maya and Arif had agreed to take things slowly, and for the first time in a long while, she found herself allowing him back into her life. Not all at once, but in small, quiet ways. They exchanged messages, shared brief phone calls, and occasionally met for coffee. There were no grand gestures, no promises of a future that neither of them could yet guarantee. Instead, there was just the slow, steady process of rediscovering each other. For Maya, it wasn't easy. Every conversation, every moment spent together was tinged with doubt. Could she really trust him again? Could she allow herself to fall back into the rhythm of their old connection without getting hurt once more? She often found herself second-guessing her decisions, replaying every interaction in her mind, searching for signs of change, signs of sincerity. But Arif was patient, more patient than he had ever been. He didn't rush her, didn't push her to make a choice she wasn't ready for. Instead, he allowed her the space to process everything, to come to terms with the emotions that she had buried for so long. Each time they met, he seemed to be a little more genuine, a little more vulnerable, as though he too was slowly peeling back the layers he had built around himself. One evening, after they had spent hours talking in a quiet corner of a cafe, Arif asked her to walk with him to the park, the same park where they had once shared so many quiet moments together. As they strolled along the familiar path, Maya couldn't help but feel the weight of the past pressing down on her. It was here that they had made their plans, their dreams, only to have it all fall apart. The thought of walking these paths again with Arif, after everything that had happened, filled her with a strange mix of nostalgia and fear. "I've missed this," Arif said quietly as they walked side by side, his voice almost wistful. "I missed being with you like this, just talking, laughing, without the weight of the world between us." Maya glanced at him, her heart aching with a familiar longing. She had missed it too, more than she was willing to admit. The easy camaraderie, the way he could make her laugh when she felt like crying, the way he had always known just what to say to make her feel safe. But it was more than that. She missed the sense of connection they had shared, the feeling that they were a team, invincible together. "I've missed it too," she replied softly, her voice filled with a quiet sadness. "But it's not the same anymore, Arif. I'm not the same person I was before, and I'm not sure if I can ever be that person again." He stopped walking and turned to face her, his eyes searching hers, as though trying to read her soul. "You don't have to be the same person, Maya. You just have to be you, the person I love, no matter how much time has passed. I've changed too, you know. I've learned. And I'm not asking you to forget everything that happened. I just want a chance to show you that I'm not the man who hurt you. I've spent every day since we were apart wishing I could go back and undo my mistakes, but I can't. All I can do is move forward, and I want to move forward with you." Maya felt a lump form in her throat. His words, simple and sincere, touched something deep within her. She had wanted to hear this, wanted to believe that he had truly changed, that he was worthy of the second chance he was asking for. But the fear that she would be hurt again, that she would lose herself in the process, still lingered, heavy and suffocating. "I don't know, Arif," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know if I can trust you again. I don't know if I can let go of the past." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "I don't expect you to forget the past. I just want you to see that the person standing here today is different. I'm not asking for your heart right away. I'm asking for a chance. Just a chance to prove that we can be something real again." Maya looked at him, his hand in hers. And for a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what that might look like. What would it be like to build something new with him, to take the risk of opening her heart again? What if this time it was different? What if, against all odds, they could find their way back to each other? But there was another voice in her mind, louder, more insistent, that reminded her of the pain, the betrayal, the years she had spent healing. She had worked so hard to move forward, to build a life for herself without him. Could she really tear down the walls she had carefully constructed? "I'm scared, Arif," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm scared of what could happen if I let you back in. I'm scared of what it would mean to trust you again." "I know," he said softly, his thumb brushing across her hand in a soothing gesture. "I know you're scared, but I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. I'll wait as long as it takes, Maya. I just need you to believe that I'm serious. Believe that this time I'm not going to hurt you." Her eyes filled with tears, the weight of his words settling over her like a heavy cloak. She had been running from this for so long, trying to outrun the love they had shared, trying to bury the hope that it could still be real. But now, standing here with him, Maya realized something important. The fear would always be there. The uncertainty would always linger. But maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to let it control her. Maya took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around his hand. "Okay," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "Let's take this one step at a time, Arif. I'm not promising anything, but I'm willing to try. For us." A smile broke across Arif's face, a mixture of relief and joy that made Maya's heart flutter. He squeezed her hand, his eyes shining with hope. "That's all I'm asking for, one step at a time." As they continued walking through the park side by side, the air between them felt different, lighter. There was still so much uncertainty, so much to figure out. But for the first time in months, Maya felt a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild what they had lost. And with each step they took, that hope grew just a little bit stronger. The weeks that followed were both a challenge and a revelation for Maya. Every day felt like a delicate balance between fear and hope. The walls she had built around herself were still there, but they were beginning to crack, little by little. Each time she saw Arif, it felt like she was slowly allowing him back into the spaces of her heart that she had carefully sealed off. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't without moments of doubt, but there was something about the way he was showing up, steadily, without rushing her, that made her believe in the possibility of change. Arif had proven himself patient, even when she pulled away, even when she couldn't find the words to explain why she was hesitant to move forward. There were times when she could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the longing for something more, but he never pushed her. It was as though he understood that trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight, that love couldn't be forced back into existence. But slowly, they were starting to forge something new. One evening, as they sat in a quiet corner of a small cafe, Maya found herself studying Arif in a way she hadn't done in years. He looked different now, not just in the way his hair had grown a little longer or the faint stubble that added a new edge to his face, but in the way he carried himself. There was a quiet strength in his demeanor, a humility that hadn't been there before. He seemed more grounded, more sure of himself, but there was also a gentleness that Maya hadn't seen since their early days together. "I never thought we'd be here," Maya said softly, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. "I didn't think we'd ever have a chance to even talk like this again." Arif looked at her, his eyes softening. "Neither did I. I thought I'd lost you for good. But here we are." He paused, his gaze intense. "I don't want to waste this chance, Maya. I don't want to make the same mistakes again." Maya felt a lump form in her throat as she looked at him. His words struck a chord deep inside her. She had spent so much time convincing herself that walking away from him was the only option, that their love had been a mistake. But the truth was, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't fully let go. She had tried to convince herself that moving on was the only way forward, but she hadn't been able to bury the memories, the feelings, the connection that still lingered between them. "I'm scared," Maya admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared of going back, of trusting you again, of letting myself fall for you all over again." "I know," Arif said softly, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I know you're scared. I am too. But I can't control how you feel, Maya. I can only control how I show up. I can't promise that everything will be perfect or that we won't have more challenges along the way. But I can promise you this. I'm not going to run away again. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Maya's heart beat a little faster as she looked down at their hands, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this time things could be different. But the fear, The fear that had been her constant companion for so long was still there, lingering just beneath the surface. "I need to know," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "that this isn't just about me forgiving you. It's not just about putting the past behind us and pretending like it never happened. I need to know that we can build something real, something that's not just based on old feelings, but on who we are now, who we've become." Arif nodded, his expression serious. "I get it, and I don't want you to feel like I'm asking you to forget the past. I can't undo what happened, and I'm not asking you to pretend it didn't hurt. But I want us to start fresh. I want us to build something new together, and I'm willing to take whatever time it takes, even if it means starting from the very beginning." Maya let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of his words settle into her chest. He wasn't asking her to forget the past. He was asking her to find a way to move forward with him, to rebuild something from the ground up. "I want to believe you, Arif," she whispered. "I really do, but it's hard. It's so hard." "I know," he said, squeezing her hand gently. "But we don't have to have all the answers right now. We just need to take it one step at a time. One day at a time. And no matter what happens, I'll be here." For a moment, Maya allowed herself to imagine it, to imagine what it could be like to trust again, to love again. She thought of the things they had shared, the quiet moments, the laughter, the simple joy of being together. She thought of how they had once dreamed of a future that seemed so possible back then. Could that future still exist? Could they still have something real, something lasting? Maya looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. "One step at a time," she repeated softly, her voice trembling. Arif smiled, a small, tentative smile, as though he too was afraid to believe that things could really change. But there was something in his eyes, something that told her he wasn't giving up. Not now. Not ever. As they sat together, their hands still intertwined, Maya felt a shift inside herself. She wasn't sure where this journey would take them, or if they would ever truly be able to rebuild what they had lost. But for the first time in a long time, she felt the faintest glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't ready to give up on love yet. But as the evening wore on and the cafe emptied around them, there was a growing sense of unease in the pit of her stomach. The love that had once seemed so perfect, so certain, had fractured in ways she couldn't ignore. And no matter how hard they tried to rebuild, there was a lingering question that refused to go away. Would they ever be able to truly forget the past? Or would it always shadow them, a reminder of the love they had lost, and the trust they might never fully regain? Days turned into weeks, and while Maya tried to convince herself that she was moving forward, there were moments when she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Despite Arif's continued patience and sincerity, a nagging sense of unease lingered, growing stronger with each passing day. It wasn't that she didn't want to trust him. It was that there were still too many unanswered questions, too many things they hadn't fully addressed. She was walking on a thin line between hope and fear, and every step she took felt like a risk. Arif, on the other hand, seemed more determined than ever. Every time they met, he was there, steadfast, understanding, and unwavering in his belief that they could make it work. Yet, as the days went by, Maya began to notice something she hadn't seen before, a subtle shift in his behavior. It wasn't glaring, but it was there. Small things. The way his eyes seemed to linger on her a little longer than usual, as though he was studying her, searching for something. The way he would sometimes withdraw, his smiles not quite as warm as they used to be, as if he was holding something back. One evening, as they sat in the same quiet corner of the cafe where they had shared so many vulnerable moments, Maya felt a growing sense of tension between them. It wasn't the easy, relaxed atmosphere that had once defined their time together. Instead, there was an unspoken distance, a wall she couldn't explain. It was like they were both reaching for something that was slipping through their fingers. "Maya?" Arif said suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice was tense, but soft, like he was unsure whether he should speak the words that had been building up inside him. "I need to tell you something." Maya looked up at him, her heart skipping a beat. His expression was serious, but his eyes held a flicker of something that made her stomach twist. It was a look she hadn't seen before, one that made her nervous, as though he was about to say something that would change everything. "What is it?" she asked, trying to steady her voice, though the unease in her chest was growing. He hesitated, running a hand through his hair before meeting her gaze. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything, and I realized something. Maybe I've been holding on to the past a little too much. Maybe I've been trying to make things the way they used to be." Maya's breath caught in her throat. The way he spoke, so carefully, so measured, made her heart race with a mixture of fear and anticipation. What was he trying to say? "Arif, what do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He exhaled slowly, his gaze shifting to the table between them before returning to her. "I've been trying so hard to make everything work, to make us work, but I don't know if we're just trying to force something that isn't meant to be anymore. I think we might be holding on to something that's already gone." Maya's mind whirled, the words hitting her like a physical blow. What was he saying? That he was giving up? That they were doomed? She had spent so long convincing herself that their love could be salvaged, that they could rebuild from the wreckage of their past. But now, sitting here across from him, it felt as though the ground beneath her feet was shifting once again. "Arif, what are you saying?" Her voice trembled, the uncertainty creeping in as she struggled to keep herself together. "Are you saying that we're done?" "I'm not saying that," he replied quickly, his voice softening. "I'm saying that maybe we need to stop trying to force something that might never go back to what it was. Maybe we need to figure out who we are now, instead of trying to go back to who we were." "I'm scared, Maya. I'm scared that if we keep holding on to this idea of what we had, we'll end up losing everything." The room seemed to close in around her. His words were like a punch to her gut. She had fought so hard to hold on to the hope that they could make things work, that this second chance was a new beginning for them. But now, she was faced with the harsh reality that maybe they were both trying to cling to something that had already faded beyond recognition. "I don't know what to say," Maya whispered, her hands trembling slightly. "I don't know if I can just let go of everything we've been through. I don't know if I'm ready to accept that this is it." Arif leaned back in his chair, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and regret. "I don't want to hurt you, Maya. I never wanted to hurt you. But maybe we've been trying to pick up the pieces of a puzzle that doesn't fit anymore. Maybe it's time to let go. Not because we don't care, but because we do." The silence between them stretched on, thick and heavy. Maya's mind was racing, her heart torn between the urge to fight for them and the nagging suspicion that maybe, just maybe, Arif was right. They had both changed in ways neither of them had fully understood. The love they had once shared, the connection that had felt so certain, was slipping through her fingers like sand. "I don't know if I can do this, Arif," Maya admitted, her voice barely audible. "I don't know if I can let go." He reached across the table, his hand gently resting on hers. "I don't expect you to. And I don't want you to make any decisions right now. But I think we both need time to figure out who we are apart from each other. Maybe we need to take a step back, to really see if there's something still worth fighting for." Maya swallowed hard, fighting back tears. She didn't want to admit it. She didn't want to face the possibility that they were drifting apart. But deep down, she knew that sometimes love wasn't enough to hold two people together. Sometimes, people grew in different directions, and no amount of effort could undo that. I think I need some time too, she whispered, her voice breaking. I need to figure out what I want, what's best for me. I can't keep living in the past, hoping it will all come back. Arif nodded slowly, his expression one of quiet understanding. I get it. I'll give you the space you need, Maya. But I'll always be here, no matter what. The weight of the moment hung between them as they sat in silence. Maya's heart ached with the realization that the man sitting across from her, the man she had once loved so fiercely, was no longer the same. And neither was she. In that moment, Maya knew that the path ahead was unclear. She didn't know if there was a way back to what they once had or if they were meant to go their separate ways. But one thing was certain: things had changed. And the future they had imagined was no longer as simple as it once seemed. As the cafe around them continued to hum with life, Maya couldn't help but feel the weight of the decisions yet to come. Maya's days became a blur after that conversation, a mix of emotions she could barely keep up with. The space between her and Arif was no longer just physical, it had stretched into something deeper, something almost intangible. She spent more time in her own thoughts, replaying their conversations, the moments they had shared. But with each passing day, the questions that had been left unanswered seemed to multiply. What did she really want? Was it worth trying to rebuild something that had already broken once? Could she trust herself enough to walk away from him completely? Or was she clinging to the idea of what they had been, rather than seeing them for who they were now? The uncertainty gnawed at her, pulling her in different directions. She had thought that by stepping away from the past, she would find clarity. But instead, she found herself trapped in a spiral of doubt. Arif, for his part, had respected her need for space. She hadn't heard from him much after their conversation in the cafe. The silence between them was both a relief and a source of anxiety. There were moments when she missed his presence, his warmth, the way he could make her laugh when everything else felt heavy. But then, she would remember the pain, the betrayal, and it would remind her why she had walked away in the first place. How could she ever fully trust him again? One afternoon, as she was walking through the park alone, Maya's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Arif. Maya, I know you need space, but I'm asking for one more chance to talk. Just one more. I won't push. I promise. But I need you to hear me out. The words hung in the air, lingering in her mind. She had told him she needed time. And yet, here he was, asking for more. Her first instinct was to ignore the message, to let the silence continue. But something inside her stirred, a voice telling her that maybe this was the conversation she had been avoiding. Maybe this was the moment where they could finally stop pretending that everything was okay and confront the reality of their situation. She took a deep breath, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then, with a sense of finality, she typed a simple reply. All right. Meet me at the cafe. When she arrived at the cafe later that afternoon, Arif was already there, waiting. He was sitting in the same spot where they had had so many of their conversations, the place that had once been their haven. But now, it felt like a battleground, a place where decisions would be made, decisions that could change everything. As she walked toward him, she noticed the look in his eyes. It wasn't the same confident gaze she had known before. There was a vulnerability in him now, something raw and unguarded. He stood up as she approached, his face softening when he saw her. Maya, he said, his voice tentative. Thank you for agreeing to meet me. She nodded, unable to find the words right away. Her emotions were still tangled, still uncertain. She took a seat across from him, studying him for a long moment. You wanted to talk, she said finally, her voice steady but distant. So, talk. Arif took a deep breath, as though gathering his thoughts, before speaking. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Maya, about us, about everything. And I realized something that I've been afraid to admit for a long time. Maya's heart skipped a beat. The way he spoke, so carefully, so deliberately, made her pulse race. What was he going to say? Was this the moment he was finally going to give her the answers she had been waiting for? I think I've been holding on to the wrong things, he continued, his voice low but clear. I've been holding on to the idea of us, of what we used to be, instead of accepting who we are now. And I know that's been unfair to you. I've made you feel like you have to go back to what we were. And that's not fair. I don't want to do that anymore. Maya stared at him, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. Was this really happening? Had Arif finally understood? But, he added, his eyes locking with hers, I also know that I don't want to lose you. I don't want to walk away from what we have now, no matter how different it looks from the past. I can't promise that everything will be perfect. I can't promise that I won't make mistakes. But I want to try, Maya. I want to try to build something new, something that works for us now. Maya's throat tightened, and for a moment, she was unable to speak. It was as though all the emotions she had kept buried deep inside her were bubbling to the surface, threatening to spill over. She had spent so much time telling herself that walking away was the only choice, that starting over was the only way to heal. But what if she was wrong? What if she was so focused on the past that she couldn't see the possibilities of the present? Arif's gaze softened as he continued. I'm not asking for us to go back to the way things were. I'm asking for a chance to start over. I'm asking for a chance to show you that I'm not the same person I was before. And I need you to believe me when I say that I'm ready to build something real. Something that's not built on mistakes or regrets, but on the people we are now. Maya closed her eyes, the weight of his words pressing on her chest. She could feel her heart pulling in two different directions. The hope that had always lingered, despite everything, was still there. But so was the fear that giving him a second chance meant giving up the peace she had fought so hard to find. Could she really open herself up to him again? Could she let go of the past, of all the hurt and betrayal, and try to create something new with him? The silence between them stretched, heavy and thick. Finally, Maya opened her eyes and looked at Arif. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't know what the future held. But one thing was certain, this wasn't a decision she could make alone. I don't know, Arif, she said softly, her voice filled with vulnerability. I don't know if I can just forget everything. If I can just let go of all the pain. I don't want you to forget, he said, his voice gentle. I want you to remember. But I also want you to know that I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. I'm willing to put in the effort, to do whatever it takes, if you'll give me the chance. Maya looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, the quiet determination. She wasn't sure what would happen, but she knew she couldn't keep running from the possibility of love. Not anymore. I need time, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I need time to figure this out. But maybe, just maybe, we can try. A flicker of hope passed through Arif's eyes, and for the first time in a long time, Maya allowed herself to believe in it. In them. The days that followed were like walking through a haze, where time moved too quickly and yet, at the same time, seemed to stand still. Maya and Arif had agreed to take things slow, giving each other the space they needed while also testing the waters of a relationship that had once been broken but was now cautiously being pieced together. But as the days slipped by, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beneath the surface. Something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Was it doubt? Or was it the growing realization that Arif might not be the only one she needed to learn to trust again? There were moments, small but significant, when she caught herself watching Arif with a new perspective. When he spoke, she found herself listening more carefully, trying to discern if there was something different in his tone, his gestures, the way he looked at her. And yet, every time she allowed herself to feel hopeful, to feel like maybe they could make this work, something inside her would pull back, reminding her that hope had betrayed her before. It was one evening, just after sunset, when Arif invited her to take a walk through the old neighborhood they had once shared. The streets were quieter now, the once bustling area more subdued, as if it too had weathered the same passage of time and change they had. Maya agreed, though her heart was heavier than it had been in weeks. They had been spending more time together, but the air between them still felt thick with unspoken questions, unresolved emotions. As they walked down familiar streets, Maya couldn't help but think about how much had changed. The houses, the trees, the sidewalks they had walked together on so many years ago. Everything seemed almost unreal, as if she were walking through a memory. It felt like they were strangers, walking beside one another, yet tied together by a past neither of them could fully let go of. "Do you ever wonder how we ended up here?" Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper as they strolled past the old park they used to visit. The swings were still there, rusted and unmoving in the evening air. Arif paused, his gaze following hers before he slowly nodded. "All the time," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I wonder why we couldn't make it work back then. What went wrong? What we could have done differently?" Maya felt a lump form in her throat at his words. "I don't think we ever knew what we were doing," she said, more to herself than to him. "We were just two people trying to hold on to something that was already falling apart." Arif stopped walking and turned to face her. His expression was serious, vulnerable. "Maybe," he said softly. "But that doesn't mean we can't try again. Doesn't mean we can't make it work now, when we're different, when we've learned from the mistakes of the past." The sincerity in his voice made Maya's heart ache. He was right in one sense. Things had changed, they were different now, and maybe that gave them a chance to rebuild. But in the pit of her stomach, she still felt the weight of everything that had come before. Was she ready to try again? Was she even capable of letting herself love him the way she once had? "Arif," she began, her voice trembling, "I want to believe that. I really do, but I'm scared. I'm scared that if I let myself fall for you again, I'll just end up hurt. I can't go through that again." Arif reached for her hand, his grip warm and steady. "I know," he said softly. "I know you're scared, Maya. But I'm not asking you to let go of your fear. I'm asking you to trust me, just a little bit for now. Because I'm not going to hurt you again. I won't do that to you." She swallowed hard, her eyes filling with unshed tears. "How can you be so sure?" she asked, her voice cracking with emotion. "How can you promise me that things will be different this time?" "I can't promise that everything will be perfect," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "But I can promise that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not going to let you go through this alone." Maya looked at him for a long moment, her heart warring with her mind. She had walked away from him once, believing it was the only way to protect herself. But now, she wasn't so sure. Could she open herself up to him again? Could she truly trust him? "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, the tears finally slipping down her cheeks. "I don't know if I can let you in again." Arif stepped closer, his expression filled with tenderness and understanding. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," he said softly, wiping a tear from her cheek. "You don't have to have it all figured out. We'll take it slow, one step at a time. And if you need time to think, I'll give you that time. But I'm here, Maya. Whenever you're ready." Maya closed her eyes, letting out a shaky breath as she felt the warmth of his touch. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she could ever fully heal, if she could ever trust again the way she had before. But there was a part of her, small, but growing, that wanted to try. She wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could build something new, something that wasn't based on the past, but on who they were now. For the first time in a long time, she felt the weight in her chest begin to lift, just a little. Maybe the future wasn't as clear as she wanted it to be. But for the first time, she wasn't as afraid to walk toward it, with Arif by her side. As they continued walking, hand in hand, through the streets that had once been theirs, Maya felt a small spark of hope. It wasn't the big, explosive kind of hope she had once had, but it was enough. A quiet, steady hope that maybe, just maybe, they could start over. And maybe this time, they wouldn't make the same mistakes. But in the back of her mind, another thought lingered. An unsettling thought, one that refused to be ignored. Could she really trust him again? The question echoed in her mind as they walked side by side into the fading light, the weight of the past still hanging in the air.